The day I found out someone was trying to take my house, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The letter was sitting on the counter like it owned the place. Big bold words across the top. Notice of intent to foreclose. I remember thinking, this has to be a mistake. I don't even have a mortgage. My name is Margaret Whitaker. I'm 72 years old, widowed 4 years now, and I've lived in the same 2-story brick home in Pine Hollow Estates for almost 20 years. It's not a mansion, but it's solid. Paid off. Every nail in that house feels like it knows my name. My husband, Daniel, and I bought it after he retired from the railroad. We paid every bill on time, sometimes early, because that's just who we were. So when I read that I supposedly owed $9,840 in unpaid HOA fees and penalties, I actually laughed at first. Out loud. It sounded ridiculous in my own kitchen. Then I saw the deadline. 30 days. Or they would proceed with foreclosure. My hands started to shake. Now Pine Hollow isn't some fancy gated golf community. It's middle class. About 200 homes, trimmed lawns, 4th of July potlucks, neighbors who wave but don't really know each other's middle names. The homeowners association had always been a minor annoyance. You know, reminder emails about trash cans being visible from the street, or someone's grass being a half-inch too tall. The president of the HOA was a woman named Carla Jennings. Early 50s, sharp bob haircut, always dressed like she was about to pitch a corporate merger. She'd been president for 5 years and liked to remind people that property values had gone up under her leadership. She ran the neighborhood Facebook group like a courtroom and didn't hesitate to publicly shame anyone who questioned a rule. I'd never had a problem with her. In fact, I barely interacted with her. I paid my dues every quarter. $240. Check mailed on the 1st of the month. Like clockwork. The letter claimed I hadn't paid for over a year. I went upstairs, pulled out my filing cabinet, and laid everything out on the dining table. Bank statements. Canceled checks. Every single payment cleared. Not late. Not once. I called the number on the letter. Carla picked up on the second ring. Pine Hollow HOA, this is Carla. Carla, this is Margaret Whitaker on Cedar Lane. I just received a foreclosure notice and there must be some mistake. There was a pause, then a small sigh, like I had already inconvenienced her. Mrs. Whitaker, our records show you have been delinquent for 14 months. That's not possible, I said, keeping my voice steady. I have proof of every payment. Another pause. Then she chuckled. Actually chuckled. Well, Margaret, sometimes people your age forget they skipped a payment here or there. It happens. People your age. I felt something tighten in my chest. I don't forget my finances, I replied. I have the bank records in front of me. Then you can bring them to the management office, she said coolly. But until our system reflects payment, the balance stands. And the board has already voted to initiate foreclosure. That word again. Voted. I asked, when was this vote? That information isn't something we discuss over the phone, she said. And I would advise you to take this seriously. The deadline is firm. There it was. That tone. Polite on the surface, but with an edge. Like she had already decided who I was. After we hung up, I stood there staring at the wall. I'd spent 25 years on the state appellate bench before retiring. 25 years interpreting statutes, weighing evidence, writing opinions that shaped property law in this state. I didn't advertise it. Most of my neighbors had no idea what I'd done before retirement. I liked it that way. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Foreclosure is not a casual administrative step. It is a legal nuclear option. And something about this felt wrong. Not sloppy. Not clerical. Intentional. Over the next few days, I started quietly asking around. My neighbor Tom, who walks his golden retriever past my house every morning, mentioned he'd gotten a strange notice about late landscaping fines that he swore were paid. A younger couple 2 streets over had been threatened with a lien over architectural violations they said were never cited. Patterns start to reveal themselves when you know how to look. I requested, in writing, a copy of the board minutes approving my foreclosure. I cited the relevant statute requiring transparency. I kept it calm, professional. Carla responded with a scanned PDF 3 days later. The minutes looked off. Now most people wouldn't notice. But when you've read thousands of official records, you develop an instinct. The formatting was inconsistent. The language didn't sound like volunteer board members. It sounded like someone trying to sound official. There was a vote recorded, unanimous, but 2 of the board members listed had moved away last year. I remembered because I'd brought one of them a casserole when his wife had surgery. I sat back in my chair and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Focus. This wasn't about me forgetting a check. This was about power. HOAs sit in a strange place legally. They can fine you, place liens, in extreme cases, force the sale of your home. Most residents don't fight because the amounts are small enough to be annoying but not devastating. And people assume the board knows what it's doing. But what if the board doesn't? Or worse, what if someone on it knows exactly what they're doing? I hired a forensic accountant named David Klein. Young, meticulous, the kind of man who color codes spreadsheets for fun. I told him I wanted the HOA's financials examined, specifically fee collections and enforcement actions over the past 5 years. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "This isn't about $9,000, is it?" "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." 2 weeks later he called me back, voice tight. "Margaret, there are discrepancies. Large ones." He explained that funds from late fees and foreclosure-related costs were being routed through a separate vendor account tied to a property management company that, after some digging, was partially owned by Carla's brother-in-law. The totals over 4 years added up to over $60,000. I closed my eyes and thought of that chuckle on the phone. People your age forget. No, Carla, we don't forget. We watch. And for the first time since Daniel passed, I felt that old courtroom energy rising in me again. Not anger. Not exactly. Resolve. If she wanted to drag me into court over a lie, I would meet her there. And I would not come unprepared. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Tom with the golden retriever, not the young couple down Maple Ridge, not even my daughter in Chicago. I've always believed you don't light a fire until you know exactly where the smoke is coming from. So I let Carla think I was just another aging homeowner scrambling to gather receipts. Meanwhile, David Klein was digging. He requested the HOA's full general ledger through a formal records demand. Under state law, they had to comply. Carla stalled for a week, then sent over what looked like a sanitized export from accounting software. Clean columns. Clean totals. Too clean. David called me again. "Margaret, this is surface level. The real story's in the vendor payments." "Then follow the vendors," I told him. And he did. One vendor in particular kept popping up. Evergreen Compliance Services. They handled collections and legal processing for delinquent accounts. The HOA had paid them nearly $90,000 over 4 years. That's a lot of collections for a quiet neighborhood with 200 homes. David pulled the business registration. Evergreen Compliance Services was registered to a small office suite 20 miles away. The managing member? A man named Ryan Delaney, Carla's brother-in-law. That's when I stopped seeing this as a clerical error and started seeing it as a scheme. Over the next week, I spoke quietly with 4 homeowners who had received aggressive notices similar to mine. One older gentleman, Mr. Alvarez, told me he'd paid a settlement of $5,000 after being told his account was past due. He didn't want the stress. His wife had cancer. He just wanted peace. A single mother named Jasmine showed me emails threatening to lien her property over supposed architectural violations for a shed that had been approved 3 years prior. She ended up paying $2,000 in administrative costs. Every time I heard one of these stories, I felt that slow burn in my chest. Not just because of the money, because of the intimidation. The calculated pressure applied to people who didn't have the time, energy, or knowledge to push back. Carla wasn't just collecting fees. She was picking her targets. And she had picked wrong with me. When the 30-day deadline expired, Evergreen filed a formal foreclosure action in county court. The paperwork alleged chronic delinquency, refusal to communicate, and mounting penalties. It painted me as irresponsible, negligent. I read it twice, then set it down very carefully. If you've never been sued, let me tell you something. Even when you know you're right, it rattles you. Your name on a complaint. The suggestion that you've done something wrong. It's designed to destabilize you. But there's a difference between fear and nerves. I wasn't afraid. I filed my answer pro se representing myself. I denied every allegation and attached copies of all 14 canceled checks, bank confirmations, and a sworn affidavit stating that no valid board vote had occurred authorizing foreclosure. Then I filed a motion to compel full production of HOA financial records, including internal emails related to enforcement actions. Carla hired an attorney. Of course she did. He was young, confident, the kind who speaks in rapid procedural jargon hoping to overwhelm the other side. At the preliminary hearing, He addressed me like I was a confused retiree who had wandered into the wrong courtroom. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, smiling thinly. These matters are often best resolved through settlement. Litigation can be costly. I agree, I replied calmly. Fraud is very costly. His smile faltered. Discovery began. Emails started trickling in. Most were routine, but a few were careless. One email from Carla to Ryan read, "Push Cedar Lane forward. She won't fight it. Older homeowners always cave once the legal notice hits. Cedar Lane, that's my street." Another email outlined a projected collection target for the quarter, listing several properties, mine included, with estimated penalty accruals. This wasn't enforcement. It was revenue planning. David's forensic analysis grew thicker by the day. He traced inflated legal processing fees charged by Evergreen, fees that were then funneled back as consulting reimbursements to the HOA president's discretionary expense account. Over 4 years, the misappropriated total exceeded $72,000. When I saw that number in black and white, I felt strangely calm. There's a moment in every complex case where the fog clears and the structure of the wrongdoing becomes visible. I'd seen it many times from the bench. That moment had arrived. The hearing date for summary judgment was set for mid-October. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a navy suit I hadn't taken out of the closet in years. Simple pearls, low heels. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for a second, I saw not a 72-year-old widow, but the woman who had presided over hundreds of cases, who had written opinions cited in law schools. I wasn't going back to that life. But for one day, I was borrowing its spine. The courtroom was smaller than the appellate chambers I used to sit in. Fluorescent lights, faded carpet, a quiet hum of paperwork shuffling. The judge assigned was Michael Harrington. Early 40s, sharp eyes, reputation for efficiency. When he took the bench, everyone rose. Carla sat at the plaintiff's table in a tailored gray suit, her attorney beside her. She didn't look at me at first. When she finally did, there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Annoyance? Unease? The clerk called the case. Evergreen Compliance Services versus Margaret Whitaker. The plaintiff's attorney began. He argued procedural compliance, unpaid assessments, escalating penalties. He spoke quickly, confidently, as if the outcome was inevitable. Then Judge Harrington turned to me. "Mrs. Whitaker, please state your full name for the record." I stood. "Margaret and Whitaker." "And your occupation?" There it was. I could have said retired. I could have left it there. Instead, I answered plainly. Retired Associate Justice of the State Court of Appeals. I served from 1994 until 2019. The room shifted. Not dramatically. No gasps. But the air changed. Judge Harrington's eyebrows lifted slightly. He leaned back, studying me more closely. "Justice Whitaker," he said carefully. "Yes, Your Honor." A small pause. "I clerked for Justice Ramirez during your tenure," he said. "I remember Justice Ramirez well," I replied. Across the aisle, Carla's face drained of color. The judge cleared his throat and looked down at the file again, slower this time. "Proceed," he said to me. I walked the court through every canceled check, every bank confirmation. I explained the statutory requirements for HOA foreclosure authorization, citing the exact subsection mandating a valid board vote and transparent notice. I submitted the forensic accounting report detailing the vendor relationship, the email excerpts referencing targeted enforcement, the misallocated funds. I did not raise my voice. I did not dramatize. I simply laid the structure bare. When I finished, Judge Harrington turned to the plaintiff's counsel. "Counsel, can you explain why 2 board members listed in the foreclosure authorization had resigned prior to the recorded vote?" The attorney shuffled papers. "That may have been a clerical oversight." "And the vendor ownership overlap?" the judge continued. "Is the court to understand that the HOA president's relative receives substantial payments tied directly to enforcement volume?" Silence. Carla leaned toward her attorney, whispering urgently. The judge's tone hardened. "This court takes allegations of fraudulent foreclosure extremely seriously, particularly when evidence suggests systemic misconduct." He looked directly at Carla. "Ms. Jennings, did you authorize these actions knowing the defendant's account was current?" Carla opened her mouth, then closed it. "I relied on our system," she said finally. "That is not what I asked," the judge replied. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Mr. Alvarez. "Jasmine." The email about older homeowners always caving. The judge denied their motion for summary judgment on the spot and scheduled an evidentiary hearing. He also ordered the matter referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential financial crimes. As we gathered our papers, Carla finally looked at me fully. "You could have just paid it and moved on," she hissed quietly. I met her gaze. "So could you," I said. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. A few neighbors who had quietly come to watch avoided my eyes, suddenly aware that the story they'd been fed might not be the whole truth. But this wasn't over. Not even close. If anything, that day was just the crack in the dam. And once the water starts moving, it doesn't stop politely. Once the district attorney's office got involved, everything accelerated. At first it was quiet. Subpoenas issued. Bank records requested. Interviews conducted behind closed doors. Pine Hollow went from manicured lawns and polite waves to whispered conversations at mailboxes. You could feel it in the air, that low current of something not quite panic, but not calm either. Carla stopped posting on the neighborhood Facebook group. Then one morning, 2 investigators showed up at the HOA management office. That's when the rumors became facts. The district attorney filed formal charges 3 months later. Embezzlement, wire fraud, forgery. The total amount they alleged had been misappropriated was $74,300. They added multiple counts tied to improper foreclosure filings against at least 9 homeowners, including me. When the indictment became public record, Pine Hollow split clean down the middle. There were the ones who said, "I always knew something felt off." And then there were the ones who said, "Carla did so much for this community. There must be an explanation." Power has a funny way of creating loyalty, even when it's misplaced. My civil case moved forward alongside the criminal prosecution. Once the financial records were fully unsealed, more homeowners came forward. Mr. Alvarez filed suit. Jasmine did too. 2 retired teachers. A young veteran. One by one, people who had quietly written checks just to make the problem disappear realized they might not have been the problem at all. I won't pretend the months that followed were easy. Being right does not protect you from stress. I had nights where I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Daniel's side of the bed still empty beside me, wondering how we ended up here. I never wanted to be the center of anything. I liked my garden, my book club, my predictable routines. But there's something about injustice that unsettles you in a way that comfort never can. The criminal trial began the following spring. Carla looked smaller in the courtroom than she ever had at HOA meetings. The sharp suits were still there, but the certainty was gone. The prosecution laid out the scheme methodically. They showed how inflated legal processing fees were charged to homeowners, how evergreen compliance billed aggressively for actions that never legally materialized, how funds circled back through consulting agreements. They played the emails. Push Cedar Lane forward. She won't fight it. Older homeowners always cave. I didn't react when they read those lines aloud. But inside, I felt that same stillness I used to feel on the bench when a critical piece of evidence came into focus. This wasn't personal vengeance. It was accountability. Carla testified in her own defense. She claimed she trusted the management company, claimed she believed the accounts were delinquent, claimed she was overwhelmed and relied on recommendations. But under cross-examination, the paper trail tightened around her. The overlapping ownership, the quarterly collection targets, the discretionary reimbursements. When the verdict came back guilty on the major counts, there was no dramatic outburst, no sobbing collapse, just a long exhale that seemed to leave her all at once. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, restitution ordered in full. In my civil case, the court awarded me repayment of the fabricated balance, compensation for emotional distress, reimbursement of accounting and legal costs, and punitive damages designed to send a message. The total judgment exceeded $200,000. Money doesn't restore peace, but it does acknowledge harm. The HOA board held an emergency election. Carla was removed permanently. A new interim board took over, this time with actual transparency. They hired an independent management company. They implemented quarterly open financial reviews. Attendance at HOA meetings tripled overnight. And yet, not everything resolved neatly. Some neighbors avoided me after that. Not openly hostile, just distant. As if my refusal to quietly pay had somehow disrupted the illusion of stability they preferred. One afternoon, about a month after sentencing, I was trimming the roses out front when a woman from 3 houses down approached. I'd seen her at meetings, but we'd never really spoken. She stood there awkwardly for a moment, then said, "You know, if you hadn't fought it, none of this would have come out." There was a tone in her voice I couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Or accusation? "I didn't fight it to expose anything," I said gently. "I fought it because it wasn't true." She nodded slowly. "Still, it changed the neighborhood." I looked around at the quiet street, the identical mailboxes, the freshly painted fences. "Maybe it needed changing," I said. "That's the part people don't talk about. When corruption gets uncovered, it doesn't just remove the wrongdoer. It forces everyone else to confront how much they ignored." Some residents admitted they had suspected the fees were excessive but didn't want conflict. Others said they assumed if something illegal was happening, someone else would step in. That someone else ended up being a 72-year-old widow who refused to be dismissed. A year later, Pine Hollow feels different. Not tense exactly. More aware. Board meetings are longer. Questions are sharper. Financial statements are reviewed line by line. And me? I'm back to my garden. Back to my book club. Back to drinking coffee in my kitchen without foreclosure notices on the counter. But sometimes I think about that first phone call. People your age forget. Maybe that's the real danger. Not age. Not oversight. Assumption. Carla assumed I was isolated. Assumed I wouldn't understand the paperwork. Assumed I'd panic and write a check to make the threat go away. She assumed wrong. And here's the part one still wrestle with. If she had targeted someone without resources, without time, without the background to recognize the irregularities, how long would it have continued? How many more quiet settlements would have padded that vendor account? HOAs hold real power. The ability to fine, lien, even force the sale of someone's home is not small. It demands integrity, oversight, humility. Without those things, it becomes something else entirely. I didn't set out to be anyone's cautionary tale. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Never underestimate the person you think is easiest to overlook. Now I'd like to hear from you. If you were in my position, would you have paid the fee just to avoid the stress? Or would you have fought, knowing it might fracture your community? Do you think homeowners associations protect neighborhoods, or do they sometimes overstep their authority? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. All of them. And if you believe accountability matters, even when it's uncomfortable, share this story. Someone out there might need the reminder that standing up, even quietly, can change more than just your own outcome. Because sometimes the person they think will cave is the one who changes everything.